Hello everyone, welcome to our Cricket Nagaram podcast. This is our first full-length English episode, and joining us as special guest today, all the way from Essex, Rob Johnston from the UK. And this episode will be particularly concentrating on decoding how England have done in the India's recent series. We have already wrapped up India's performance in our last episode. If you haven't yet, you're going to check it out. So welcome, Rob. How are you doing, mate?
Yeah, thank you guys. Good to be joining you. Very well, thanks.
Yeah, exciting to have you on the podcast. Thank you for coming on the show.
Wonderful. Rob, could you just tell us a little bit of what you have done? I mean, what all the media organizations that you've worked with and what you are doing currently?
Yeah, sure. So I started off, as I said, in 2015, and I just started writing a little blog that absolutely nobody read, and I wouldn't like to go back and read those pieces now because they would be absolutely rubbish. But I started off doing it in my spare time just because I enjoyed it, and then I managed to get a few freelance pitches with the cricket paper here in the UK. So that's a weekly paper that is produced during the summer. Managed to get a few freelance pieces just doing some interviews, and from then on for about the next 2 years I just worked as a freelancer, just picking up some pieces. So I've written some stuff for Cricinfo, for the Cricketer magazine, and some other publications as well. And then about 2017, CricBuzz, I did some freelance stuff for CricBuzz, and an opportunity came up to be their English cricket correspondent. And fortunately and lucky enough, I was able to get that job, and I've been there ever since, and that's my role now. I'm the English cricket correspondent at CricBuzz, and yeah, loving it. You know, it's a fantastic place to work for and a fantastic organisation, and yeah, you know, hopefully there'll be many more years of finding good stories and writing good stories for CricBuzz, because you know, it's a great place to work, and if you're a cricket lover, there's no better place than going there and scrolling through the app.
Wonderful, Rob. But as an English cricket fan, what is that, one like victory that sort of made you go bonkers? I'm pretty sure 2019 World Cup would have been on the top of the rack, but is there some victory that you were absolutely, sort of created a little bit of an inspiration in you, or something that you want to take cricket as an option, cricket writing as an option?
Yeah, it was. So I was lucky enough to be at the MCG in 2010 on Boxing Day, when England bowled Australia out for 90 odd and then finished the day 150 for naught. I've been to Australia a few times now, and I've seen a lot of England defeats and not many wins, but that was obviously a really special day. And like, if I had to pick one, the World Cup obviously is. I was lucky enough to be at Lord's, and that was just a wonderful, wonderful day. But that day at the MCG, it was hard to beat. I wasn't actually working. I was just there on holiday with my dad. And so we'd had a couple of beers and we're watching, and yeah, it was a fantastic day. And from then, I'd always loved cricket, but I'd really, that sort of day showed me how special cricket could be. And from then on, I've just, as I said, I was always in love with it, but fell in love with it even more, really. And but I actually only started taking up cricket writing in about 2015, so relatively new to the industry still. But it took me a bit of a while to sort of find my way from that game, the MCG. But what a day! I'd love to go back and repeat that. That was amazing.
Well, Rob, I'll start off with a very common question. I think. The rotation policy about England, I think it's been doing rounds all over the place. So I just want to know the reaction of the fans in the UK and how they're, sort of taking this move by England selectors, where they plan to, rest and rotate the players.
It's a good question, because it's provoked a lot of discussion and debate and quite a lot of criticism, actually. Particularly after the last 3 test matches that England lost, and they were obviously missing some players for those games, Josh Buttler, Moeen Ali, who went home after the second test. So there's been a lot of reaction to it, and a lot of criticism directed at the rotation policy. But I think some of it's a bit misguided. There's 2 aspects to it. There's firstly the aspect that, England have got, I think it's something like 118 days of cricket planned for this year, if all of the test matches went the full length. The players just can't play all of that, particularly now they're in biosecure bubbles. So there has been a bit of criticism from the fans saying, well, players should just play and get on with it. They get paid enough money. But I don't think that's realistic, and I don't think that's fair. But the other aspect to it is, if you agree that players can't play everything, then the next question is, okay, so what cricket should they miss? And there's been quite a bit of criticism saying a test series against India in India is such a high profile series and should be one of England's main objectives. So to rest a lot of players throughout that series was the wrong decision. And, other games should be missed, and cricketers should miss the IPL and stuff like that. So I think on that second point, there's more sort of basis to the criticism. But yeah, there has been a lot, and it's been talked about, and it's still being talked about. We've had 3 press conferences ahead of the T20 series that starts on Friday, and every single player has been asked about rest and rotation. So it's not going away.
Especially, I think, the Moeen Ali episode where, I didn't understand why Dom Bess was rested after the first test match, because he wasn't bowling that badly, actually. The fallout from that, from my point of view, is that Dom Bess came back into the last test match very short on confidence, which was actually counterproductive to the English team. I don't know what the English selectors were thinking about that, but that definitely backfired, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it did backfire. I think I'd agree. But that final test, Dom, I felt quite sorry for him at the end. You could tell that he was really struggling, his body language. He wasn't having a good time. I think that in terms of Moeen Ali, the fact that he caught COVID-19 on arrival in Sri Lanka really put the spanner in England's plans, because I do think that Moeen probably would have played those 2 tests in Sri Lanka if he'd have been able to, and then he would have started the series against India, played the first 2 test matches, and then gone home after that. Then Dom probably would have come into the side, and wouldn't have had that experience of being dropped, so probably would have been in a better place. So I do think COVID-19 put a spanner in the works. I think what they were thinking after the first test is, and you're right, in the first innings, I wrote a piece actually after the first innings where that was probably Bess's best day as an England test match bowler. He got Virat Kohli out, he got 4 wickets and bowled really, really well. But I think England was spooked by the final innings where he didn't bowl well. He bowled a lot of bad balls, and India's batsmen got after him. Even though they'd lost, in a losing position, they were still able to sort of dominate Dom. So I think that's England. And also they thought, well, Moeen's going home after the second test. If we don't play him in the second test, we're not going to play him at all this winter. And that's probably not a position they wanted to be in. So, yeah, a lot of different aspects to that. But I think you're right. Ultimately, we got to the stage at the end of the series when Dom Bess looked totally shot confidence, and it wasn't a particularly nice thing to see.
The thing is, Dom Bess has been, I think he's just 24, but I think he's got enough guidance back in England. I think players like the legend like Rangan Herath, Sakleen Mustak, and even Jeetan Patel, I think they've been in around England camp, and they've been working with Dom Bess. So what do you think has Dom Bess do to sort of improve his test credentials? Because from what I know, he doesn't play a lot of white ball cricket, and he's more of he also plays in tracks where it's sort of conducive to spin, if I may say so, because it plays in Somerset. I know he's played, I think, one off season at Yorkshire, but how much of a factor? And also, I've listened to one of the recent podcasts from Sky where Nas had mentioned that the players have to take responsibility. So what is your take on this, and specifically about Dom Bess and the development factor that's been going in and around England?
Yeah, I think there's a few things at play with Dom. So the people you mentioned there, Rangan Herath, Jeetan Patel, they really rate Dom Bess highly in terms of the skills he's got, the potential he's got, and the bowler that he can become. So I don't think there's any doubting his talent. He's young, and at Somerset he found himself in a really strange position of being the second spinner at his county. So Jack Leach also plays for Somerset, and for the whole of Dom Bess's county career, he's been having to compete with Jack Leach, and you're right, the pitches in Somerset, have been conducive to spins. So typically Somerset will play 2 spinners at home, which has given Dom some match play. But when they go away and in certain games, they tend to play 1 spinner, and that spinner has been Jack Leach. So Dom actually hasn't had as much match play bowling as he would have liked, or the England coaches would have liked at the stage of his career. Now, he has moved to Yorkshire permanently. He went on loan to them last year and the year before. He's now moved to Yorkshire permanently. So the hope is that will be their number 1 spinner, and the hope is that he will get a lot more overs under his belt. And it is that those match play overs and the lack of them, which the England coaches believe is the reason why he's not as consistent as he needs to be. So you'll notice with him that he often will bowl a short delivery at least once every couple of overs. There have been a lot of full tosses in the Indian series. He just doesn't have that consistency yet that comes with bowling lots and lots of overs. So hopefully the move to Yorkshire will really help him, because he'll get more match play overs in. And then it's just a matter of time about getting that in. So I think that's the one thing that England want. They're happy, I think, in a way that he's moved from Somerset. And hopefully he'll get some more overs now.
So Rob, I think if you just talk about the county cricket in general, I mean, the role of the spinners in county cricket is more of, to restrict the runs and, more of a holding role. And when they do come out to, subcontinent conditions like Sri Lanka and India, they will have to do a bit of a completely opposite role to what they've been used to in county cricket. So is county cricket doing anything different to, get themselves, get these guys prepared for the big tours? And I know England have been concentrating on all this England line tours, and they've been giving players enough match practice, and some of the names that we mentioned, bringing in all the specialists. But how much of an impact is the county cricket having actually on all the results that we are seeing, especially on the away tours?
I think it's having a big impact, actually, and it's something that is not an issue. I remember when England lost in India in the 2016 Test series, the same points were being made around England's inability to the batsmen to play top quality spin, and the lack of top quality spinners available to the selectors. So since that 2016 series, not a huge amount has changed, and arguably things have got more difficult for spinners in county cricket. And the reason for that is that the county championship season has been split and more or less shoved to the very beginning of the season and the very end of the season, with the middle part being devoted basically to white ball cricket. So 2020 50 over cricket, and now this summer coming will be the 100 new competition as well. And what that's meant is at the start of the season, the weather typically is not particularly good. There's not a lot of sun, so the pitches always have a bit of moisture in them, and that obviously brings the fast bowlers into the game far more. And you typically get, actually, a lot of counties won't even pick a spinner in a lot of their games at the start of the season. So it's just marginalised the spin bowlers in that phase. Towards the end, it's a bit different. If we've had a hot summer, some of the games at the end of the season can be played on real dry pitches that then can bring spinners into the game. And but again, at the end of the season, the weather can also be pretty poor, which can be the same end result as at the start of the season. So in an ideal world, more county championship cricket needs to be played in the middle of the summer when the weather's better, the pitches can be harder, flatter, drier, and that will bring more spin into the game. And obviously the more spin that's bowled, the more batsmen get used to it as well, facing spin. So I think personally, the ECB are doing a lot to try and improve individual spinners and batsmen, and in terms of their Lions programs and other things which we might touch on. But county cricket at the moment is not doing much at all to help the development of spin in English county cricket, domestic cricket, and that is a big issue. And until that changes, I don't think we're going to see much consistent success in the subcontinent for England's Test team.
Yeah, talking about spinners in England, yesterday night I saw Englishman wearing a turban and running through an Indian top order. I mean, maybe you guys can give him a call and summon him back to the English side. What say?
Yeah, I saw Monty's figures there, and obviously he was a massive part of that 2012 Test series win in India, wasn't he? And actually, he's been playing last few years some club cricket in Essex, some league cricket, and doing well there. So yeah, I mean the way he bowled yesterday, blimey, get him in.
Yeah, I still have nightmares about that 2012 tour where I mean Swan and Monty outbowled Ashwin and Oja at that time. So yeah, I think I think Swan being the best off spinner in probably 30 to 40 years that England has produced, he should play a more leading role in mentoring young spinners like Dom Bess, right? I mean, but I seldom see him in the scene. He's mostly on the media. So I mean, is it a clash of personalities with him and the Ashley Giles and all, or else it is something that coaching is a specialist position and Swan is not cut out for it?
Yeah, I think it's exactly that. I think, if you listen to Graham, was a fantastic bowler for England, a fantastic off spinner, one of the best that the country's ever had. But coaching is very different. The ECB rate Jeetan Patel very, very highly. And actually, when you listen to him speak, I've spoken to him quite a few times about spin. He is very, very knowledgeable. The players really love him, working with him. And he spent a lot of time coaching and getting his qualifications. So I don't think England ever say that they wouldn't want their spinners to speak to Graham Swan or anyone else. I think during the series, Kevin Peterson said something similar, is available to speak to some of the young batsmen if they wanted to, and Chris Silverwood has said that he's happy for them to do that. But I think that's more than an informal basis. They do believe rightly, I think, that coaching is a specialist skill and a specialist career, and that's why they've sort of not involved people like Graham in the official coaching squad. But I think if I was a young spinner, I would be on the phone to Graham and I'd be speaking to him and asking him about spin and talking to him. And there's nothing to stop any young English spinner doing that.
Also, Rob, would you like to I know we've been talking a lot about the criticism part, but if there's one positive that that England can take back after this series, what do you think that could be?
I think there's a couple of positives, really. I think, firstly, the bowling of Jack Leach. I thought Jack had a really good winter. He had a very, very difficult year last year. He was ill at the start of the year in South Africa and had been ill the previous tour in New Zealand. He hardly played any cricket last summer because he was in the bio bubble with England, but not actually playing in the team because Dom Bess was in the team. So for Leach to come back into the side, I think he did really well. He bowled well against, or bowled better as the series against Sri Lanka went on, and then bowled pretty well generally against India. And I wrote a piece on how he'd been really working harder at bowling a little bit quicker for this tour, and that really seemed to pay dividends. So I think that is a real positive for England, because the spin position, even though Dom had been playing for the last year, had been up in the air, and I think for now, at least in the short term, there's no doubting that Jack Leach is the number one spinner and deserves to be, and will start the summer as England's number one spinner. And I think that's really good. His performance warrant that. And I also think there were, in terms of the batting, I think a couple of decent performances from Dan Lawrence this winter. So he's obviously made his debut in Sri Lanka and then scored a nice 50 against India. Yes, the pressure was off in that final test because England had basically were going to lose, but still it was facing high class on a very difficult pitch, and he played very well. So I think that is a positive. And obviously Joe Root started the year in excellent form, and he did tail away in India, but still to start with huge hundreds he did in the first three test matches is really important for Joe, because there was starting to his record as captain and his batting had started to become a problem last year when he wasn't scoring the amount of runs we know he's capable of. So I think that's a positive that he's sort of got back to those high standards. So I think there's a few positives, but generally the way the India series ended means that sort of things are probably more negative than positive.
Yeah, Rob, you were referring to the Sri Lanka series, right? So me and Raj were watching that Sri Lanka series and were looking at Joe Root piling on all the runs, and even people like Dan Lawrence were playing pretty well. And actually, the pitches in Sri Lanka were not at all docile. I mean, they were pretty spicy. I remember watching Joe Root play a reverse sweep of Lasith Tembuldeniya, where I mean there was no way that he was going to get his bat down in time, but he was able to do that. Then suddenly, I mean, after the first test, they carried that form, and then everybody was singing praises of Chris Silverwood and the importance that they've given to the red ball cricket. And then suddenly everything went south after the second test at Chepauk. So, what happened actually? I mean, so what is the difference between the Sri Lanka series and then the later part of the India series? What really changed in the team, and or was it just the pitches? Because I mean, to me, the Sri Lanka pitches were also not very. I mean, they were also pretty spicy. So, what was it that changed?
Yeah, it's a good question actually, and in terms of what changed, I think you're right in that the pitches in Sri Lanka were spin friendly. They probably weren't, to be honest, as spin friendly early on in those two test matches as they were in the last three in India. So yes, they did turn, and by the end of those two test matches in Sri Lanka, the pitches really were, turning, but they were very slow generally, and the pitches the first 2 days on both of the test matches were pretty good for batting, and England managed to make hay. And once they got those big first innings totals, then the matches sort of looked after themselves. So I do think the pitches for the last three test matches in India spun more earlier. But at the same time, you're quite right in that the Sri Lanka pitches were difficult. But clearly, the Indian spinners are far better than the Sri Lankan spinners. Embuldinia is an excellent bowler, but probably Axar Patel. Axar Patel did outbowl him from what the test matches that England played. Axar bowls a bit quicker and exploited the conditions very well. But Embuldinia didn't have any backup against for Sri Lanka. It was basically him trying to thwart England on his own. Whereas clearly for India, they had Ashwin, they had Axar Patel and Washington Sundar as backup as well. So the quality of the spinners clearly played a part. India's far better than Sri Lanka, and as a result, England found far more difficult to play. And I do think actually the rotation policy had a bit of an impact with the batting against India as well. If you think Johnny Bairstow, as an example, played in Sri Lanka, got 4 decent scores in Sri Lanka, then went home for 2 weeks and came back. Just appeared to lose his rhythm mostly. And he wasn't the only batsman who was shovelled around the order, up the order, and dropped Rory Burns. Zach Gawley was injured. Dan Lawrence came into the side, was out of the side. So I think in Sri Lanka they picked the same 10 in a row. India, there was a lot more flux, and I think that probably played a part. It's a combination, but
Yeah, I mean, I remember in the first test match, I mean, the entire English team was sweeping, and then from the second test match, when Akshar Patel was introduced into the attack, then the entire bowling length changed, and even Ashwin wasn't letting them sweep. So probably the Indian bowling attack adapted better than the Sri Lankan one, because all through the Sri Lanka series, all the English batsmen were sweeping without any harm. But that changed in the Indian series, so that they probably didn't expect that. They didn't expect Akshar Patel to debut, and with his variety of bowling, probably that sweeping plan came apart.
yeah, I think so. And you're right. They didn't. England's batsmen did sweep much. I think they were a bit more concerned about the bounce against India. As I said, the pitches in Sri Lanka were quite slow and low. There was more bounce in some of the pitches during the Test series in India, and that then makes sweeping a bit more difficult. It brings the top edge into play. And we saw actually Joe who's a fabulous sweeper of the ball, just an amazing has an amazing sweep shot in normal sweep and the reverse sweep. But even he was hedging quite a lot of the sweep shots he played against India. So I think the bounce played a part, and obviously the pace of the ball as well, particularly from Axar. I mean, he was bowling quicker, and also very straight, and that's something that against Sri Lanka, Root particularly, anything outside off stump, he likes to sweep. When it's straight, it's obviously more difficult because if you miss it, LBW bowled. If it's outside of stump, might have a bit more of a chance. So, but yeah, you're right. They just didn't seem to play the sweep shot as much after having a lot of success with it in Sri Lanka.
Yeah, it was actually shameful to see Joe Root. I mean, who's such a brilliant player of spin. I mean, normally, even after the first Test match, when we were reviewing the Test match, we thought that we don't know if we can stop Joe Root. But suddenly, from the second Test match onwards, he's been caught on the crease. He's been LBW playing back. So that was a little bit. I mean, I felt sad for Root. Just when people were again singing praises of him. Just 6 months ago, there were talks about Joe Root not being a part of the Fab Four anymore, and then he makes a comeback in terms of runs. But then again, people will start asking questions about him, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. And you're right. Some of the dismissals were very like Joe Root, actually missing straight balls, getting caught in the crease. Mohammad Siraj got him LBW. I remember when. And Root didn't really seem to move. He just sort of stood there, and the ball hit him, and you could tell how disappointed he was with when he walked off. And I wonder, England played 6 Test matches in 7 weeks, all of which obviously they were in a biosecure bubble. And I just think, Root obviously has a lot on his shoulders in terms of England's batting in the subcontinent, because he is their best player in those conditions, and he has to shoulder a lot of the weight. And I wonder whether, he was just knackered by the end of it, having to captain, having to be looked upon to score so many runs all the time. So it's a really disappointing end. But I still think his game is in a good place. A few months off now before the English summer, and hopefully he'll score some runs.
Well, since we're talking so much about batting, I think this episode would be incomplete without mentioning our special SRH player Johnny Bairstow. I think I'd like to quote something from The Guardian here, which I picked it up. Since the home series against India in 2018, Bairstow has changed batting positions 14 times in 18 tests. And in the same period, he played 1 test with gloves, and then 1 without, and then 1 with, and then 3 without, then 7 with, then 5 without. In the same period, he was left out and recalled on 4 occasions. It is 4 years since he batted an entire series that constitutes of at least 3 tests in the same position. So what's your take on this, Rob? And could you just tell our listeners a brief of what exactly happened with Johnny Bairstow, or whether or not he's going to be a part of England's test future?
Yeah, sure. He has been... depending on your view, you would say he's either been messed about or he's just been, asked to play roles. But certainly since the summer of 2018, when India visited, he has played a various number of roles. Some of the time he's had the wicket-keeping glove, some of the time he hasn't. And it really coincided during that 2018 summer when Josh Buttler was recalled to the team. And he was recalled to the team by Ed Smith, who was at the time had just been appointed as the national selector. Bairstow was moved from number 7 to accommodate Buttler in that team. Bairstow kept the gloves for that summer, but he was moved, and from that time on, Bairstow's returns have just fallen down. Before that, he was batting at 7, keeping wicket. I think during the 2016, 2017 period, he was scoring runs, heaps of runs, averaging well over 40. But since that move, he has been his returns have sort of dropped off a cliff. And I think whether he's got a future, I don't now see him actually having a future in the short term in Test cricket. I don't think he will have, because England in in home conditions will, I think, just go back to the team that they played last summer with Rory Burns, Zach Crawley, and Don Sibley at the top of the order, with Root, Stokes, Ollie Pope in the middle, and Butler at 7. So I don't see how Johnny Bairstow is going to get in. This really was his opportunity this winter to make a real claim, score a couple of hundreds, and basically mean that the selectors couldn't pick him, couldn't drop him. But as I said earlier, I do think he was hamstrung by the rotation policy, because he played well in Sri Lanka. He really did. Probably England, aside from Root, England's second best batsman. He went home, come back, and he basically was just thrown straight into a test match. Seemed to have lost his rhythm. And it's another example of him just being shunted around the order, moved in and out of the side, and suddenly, he's expected to go and be England's number 3 and score 100 against India in difficult conditions after being at home for 2 weeks in England when it was snowing and and then he's got a quarantine when he goes back. So on Twitter, there are loads of people, every time he fails, they hammer him and they say he's not good enough. Why are we persisting with him? He's not a test player. But that does miss the context that he hasn't always been supported in the way that other players have and backed in the way that other players have. So there is some context there. But ultimately, I don't see him playing during the summer unless England have a spate of injuries. Where that then means that's the end of his test career remains to be seen. But I think this winter was an opportunity, probably one he hasn't taken.
Yeah, I hope that we get to see him again in the England Test squad. But yeah, as you said, it's going to be a distant dream, I guess, in the coming future. We need to talk about another player over here. From the 2019 Ashes, Jofra Archer has been in the thick of things for England. And then everybody expects him to be the bowler who's going to take on the mantle after Anderson and Broad retire. Anderson, though he's looking as good as he ever has, will be at his peak for another couple of years. And maybe if he's fit enough, he'll play another 2 years like Kapil Dev did at the end of his career. And I think Anderson will have a longer career than Stuart Broad. I think Stuart Broad will be done, and then Anderson will play on for another year or two. But then, what's life after Anderson and Broad?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think Anderson will play on, but not infinitely. Both Anderson and Stuart Broad want to make this winter's Ashes series at the end of the year. And I think if England won that, then it could actually be the end of Anderson and Broad, because they may think that's a great time to sort of go out. But I think in terms of what comes next, I do think it sort of depends on the conditions. So at home, Chris Woakes is, in my view, the third best bowler that England have got in their home conditions. He was player of the season last year after his exploits in the Test series against West Indies and Pakistan. At home, he is a brilliant bowler. He's got a better average than James Anderson in England, and that's over a consistent period of time, it's not just 1 or 2 games. And he is, still in his very early 30s. He's got, certainly Woakes will be, at least for a short period, the leader of England's attack at home, and I think he would have deserved that. Away from home is a bit different. Woakes' record isn't particularly good at away from home, and he acknowledges that, although there were some signs last winter that he's starting to get a hang of it. So I think away from home, it is a bit different. And I think that's where particularly Jofra Archer comes in with his pace, with his skill on flat pitches that maybe don't seam and swing around as much, so that he has got the skills and the ability to be England's go-to bowler. But I think Jofra is an interesting case. He hasn't actually played that much Test cricket. He's actually only played, I think, 6 of the last 15 Test matches that England played, and part of that's been injury, part of that has been rotation. And he is a very experienced bowler in red ball cricket generally, so both at first class level and Test cricket. So I do think England need to find a way of playing him in more Test cricket. Obviously, you can't play him if he's injured, but I think he needs to play more Test cricket. So Look, in the short term, Anderson and Broad aren't going anywhere. For the rest of this year, they're going to be leading the attack. Whether they continue to play next year or not remains to be seen. But I think in Chris Wokes and Archer, England have got two bowlers to be able to lead the attack, as well as some good young bowlers coming through the ranks. But yeah, as I said, I think Archer actually needs to play more Test cricket because he hasn't played a huge amount over the last year, and he probably needs to.
What about Ollie Stone? I mean, we actually loved him in that second Test match. I mean, even though the conditions weren't weren't favoring the faster bowlers, he actually bowled really well and he was really impressive. I mean, oh, I was like, I mean, we haven't seen this guy a lot. I mean, where was he when the Ashes was happening in 2017? I mean, because he would have been perfect for Australian conditions. So, will Ollie Stone start in the Ashes 11 end of the year?
I'm not sure he's going to start, but he'll definitely, if he's fit, he'll definitely be in the squad, as will Jofra Archer and as will Mark Wood. England have earmarked all three of those bowlers as bowlers that they want in Australia. Whether Ollie Stone starts remains to be seen, but I think Mark Wood and Jofra are both ahead of Ollie Stone in the pecking order. But you're right. I mean, he bowled really well in that Test match, in that second Test match. He made his debut 2 years ago against Ireland, and then has had some really bad injury problems. Just his career has been one of serious injuries throughout. But he's got pace, he's got skill, he's very accurate now, more accurate than he was probably 2 or 3 years ago. So he will definitely be on the plane to Australia next winter as he's fit. And England, what England want is they want to have in their team to play the Ashes at least one genuinely quick bowler, and Stone is one of the three that they will take with them, and they'll pick at least one in each of the 5 Test matches. So, I would imagine Ollie Stone at some point will get a go in the Ashes, but he won't start, I don't think.
I couldn't agree more about Ollie Stone there, Rob, because I remember covering one of the 50-over England domestic games, and he was absolutely hurrying the batsmen and ripping the poles off, and so it's really gun bowler. And I think he's one bowler after Mark Wood I was really wanting to see more in international cricket, and we hope he'll do well in the Ashes. But since we're talking so much about the future and Ashes and all that stuff, I thought it's the right time to ask you this question, that when England and all these selectors had got in, they decided that, okay, this year we're going to have 17 Test matches and we're going to have a lot of T20 cricket, the World Cup and EIPL and all this stuff. Do you think they've prioritized Ashes? Do you think they've put Ashes as their top priority and, everything else later? Or we are just reading too much into this?
No, I think you're spot on. They have put the Ashes as top priority for their Test team this year. That isn't a secret. England have been talking about winning the Ashes ever since Chris Silverwood took over as head coach at the end of 2019. That has been his ambition. England don't win very much in Australia. Certainly recently they don't. And that has been England's focus since Silverwood took over, and it is their priority this year. Now, you can argue whether that's right or wrong, or whether they should be also focusing on other series, but certainly that is the priority. And I think what that doesn't mean is that they're just saying any other Test matches they play are irrelevant. They don't care about the results. Clearly, they will not be in a good position for the Ashes next year unless they take the Tests between now and then seriously and try and develop a squad of players who can compete. But the Ashes is the focus. The other focus this year for England is the World T20 in October in India. Again, that's no secret. It is their second focus, or their joint focus, really. And it's interesting because I think all the talk of rotation you see at the moment, because England have lost in India, but actually if when we get to the end of the year, if England have won the World T20 in India and then go to Australia and win the Ashes, I think a lot of England supporters will be very happy with that. and would say, okay, so rotation was worth it. I do think that's the case. And again, whether that's right or wrong, I think that will be the case. So, it's the priority. But what that meant this time is that the series against India, England didn't have their strongest team out, and that is something that they have chosen to do. It wasn't forced upon them necessarily. They've chosen to do that. And would they have beaten India for those 4 test matches even with their strongest team? I don't think they would, but they probably would have pushed them a bit harder.
Yeah, I mean, now you're even talking about the World T20, right, in India. So I think that is the only reason why England agreed to let their players stay in India for the IPL and even skip the New Zealand test matches in order to complete the playoffs, right? Or else, I mean, looking at how the relationship between ECB and the IPL from the KP days, so I don't think that KP would have dreamt about having such support from the English board, right?
When Peterson was trying to play the IPL, that would absolutely never have happened, that he would have been allowed to miss an England test match to play in the IPL, and that caused a lot of friction between him and the ECB. But it is different now. It's changed a lot since that time. And encourage their players to play in the IPL, but also the other T20 competitions around the world. And it looks like if any England player is involved in the IPL playoffs games and the final, then they won't be playing against New Zealand. It's a little bit different in the New Zealand test matches were added into the calendar very late, and they were added in to make up some financial shortfall from COVID-19. So these weren't originally in the fixture list, and had they not been added, England's players wouldn't be missing anything. They'd be playing the IPL, they'd come home and they'd be ready for the international summer. So it's a bit of a unique situation, but also England's players have already missed test matches this year because of the IPL. Butler, Stokes, Archer, they have all been rested for periods of the test matches because they are going to be playing at the IPL, and England don't want them to be away from home for 5 months. Now, if you take the IPL away, it would be 3 months, and then probably they would have picked their strongest team. So they will be missing test matches in New Zealand, but they've already missed test matches because of the IPL.
But I mean, I think this has caught a lot of flack, right, in UK. I mean, especially, I mean, Mike Atherton, who is normally a saner voice. I mean, he's been demanding why English players are being allowed to stay on in the IPL, and because they have $1 million contracts from the ECB, and why do you want to risk Archer being overworked in the IPL and not being fresh for the Ashes by the end of the year? So I mean, so I guess Ed Smith and co are playing with fire, I guess.
I actually very much understand that point of view because, fundamentally, players are playing in a domestic tournament in India, and I know the IPL is a fantastic tournament. I love the IPL, but it's a domestic tournament, different country, while England are going to be playing Test cricket, and that is very interesting position that actually has never really happened before. We haven't had players, first choice test players, being ruled out of test matches because they are off playing somewhere else. That hasn't happened before, and there is an argument that Atherton has made, and others have made around, the ECB played contracts, and I think that's a very fair and valid point. At the same time, what I would say is the IPL has been very good for a number of cricketers in terms of the experience it's given. It's been very good for England's white ball cricket generally. A lot of players have had experience in the IPL that has then allowed them to come and play well for England. There is the financial aspect. The England players took a pay cut last year and a pay cut for this year because of COVID-19. So again, to say you can't play all, the IPL is taking more money off them, and that's not necessarily an easy thing to do. It's a very complicated situation. But if you asked an England supporter in the street and said, "What do you think of this?" many of them would be very unhappy that Ben Stokes will not play at least the first test match against New Zealand because he's playing for Royals in the final of the IPL. they would be and are going to be and have been very unhappy.
So I guess we have to wait for the first test match over there, and I think it'll be in Southampton, right? Where I mean the New Zealand new ball attack will rip through the English batting order, and then I guess the English press will write obituary of the English Test team again. So, but I mean, keeping all that aside, I mean, now, I mean, England has just lost 3-1 in India. So, what is the actual public reaction in UK? I mean, are people indifferent to the result because they know that Ashes is the real deal, or are they actually really unhappy with the way the team has performed? Because I mean, because as you said, the ECB has prioritized the Ashes and has kind of decided that the India series doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things.
The reaction has been quite strong in terms of, there's been a lot of criticism directed at the players. There's been quite a lot of talk around the domestic system that we spoke about earlier and criticising that and why we don't prepare or produce players who are able to sort of thrive in the subcontinent regularly. But I don't think, and it's been compounded because England rotated players, right? That created more noise than probably would have happened anyway. If England have had their full strength side out, been beaten by India, there would have still been disappointment, but it wouldn't have been as much an issue or as much of a disappointment as it has been here, because there is a feeling, like you say, that England haven't taken or didn't take that seriously, weren't actually that bothered about winning it. They'd rather win the T20 series that follows and then get to the rest of the year and focus on the World Cup and the Ashes. So I think that's why there's a lot of disappointment, and there's a lot of disappointment. But also I think there's a lingering sense that, in beating India in Test cricket, nobody actually does that anymore. Teams don't go to India and win, and that's why India are such a fine team in their own conditions. So I think there's also a bit of, okay, we lost. We probably could have done a bit better and should have done a bit better, but we were probably going to lose anyway. So I think that's probably tempered some of the reaction.
So I guess you all need another version of KP to come back and square things off in India.
Yeah, no, that would be great. And actually, he did. I'm not sure whether you could get it in India, but he did the radio commentary for Talk Sport here in the UK for the third Test match. And the way he talks about batting is just fantastic. And some of those innings he used to play for England. I mean, it would be great to have a player like him back. But there's not too many like KP going around, is there?
Yeah, he's a once in a generation cricketer. I mean, that is a rare title that I give to players. I mean, Ben Stokes is another one. And coming to Ben Stokes, I mean, I made a prediction early in the series that he would win a test match on his own because he has the habit of doing that. I mean, I just feared that he was about to do that in the fourth test match. But I mean, the fact that India could steamroll even Ben Stokes on his day, I guess it's fair result, the 3-1 result to India.
Yeah, and you're right. He does tend to do that, and I wondered whether in the final test he was going to do that. He scored that 50 in the first innings, which sort of kept England, didn't keep them in the game because their total was very much under par, but at least got them over 200. And then his bowling on the second day, he was, he's an absolute machine running in like he does in those when the game's on the line. And just England couldn't quite squeeze enough to get India all out in that first innings. But I think actually Ben Stokes would be pretty disappointed with the series he had. His record in the subcontinent actually isn't particularly good. Certainly isn't as good with the bat, anywhere near as good as he is around the rest of the world. So I think he'd be a bit disappointed. Ravi Ashwin kept getting him out and has got him out however many times now, a lot of times. And I think, I think he'd be disappointed. And you're right, England rely on Stokes to do the impossible quite a bit. And I guess sometimes that's not going to come off. And for England, that didn't this series, unfortunately.
Well, Rob, I think we've been talking too much cricket here, but I think I'd like to ask you something that, because we're in this tough times where, even it's with players moving from one bubble to the other, and you've been doing a lot of interviews of the past and present cricketers. So how are the players coping up with these bio bubbles, and how much of it has they actually affected their cricket?
Yeah, it has been tough for the players actually. And you get, when you talk to the players, you get a consistent message that it is not easy. It is, I think, quite draining in a funny way, because they are going from cricket ground to hotel, hotel to cricket ground. That's all they do. I spoke to a few of England's reserve players a couple of weeks ago for a piece I wrote, and sort of asked them what they were doing. And, you know, there isn't much to do. They go and play cards, or they'll play Monopoly, or they'll play Call of Duty on the PlayStation, but they can't do anything else. And I think it does actually, a couple of things have shone through, is that it is more tiring for some reason. And I think maybe we'd all recognize that sometimes, you know, I don't know, if you spend a weekend and you just sit on the couch all weekend, you feel more tired than actually if you've been out doing stuff and, you know, going shopping or whatever. And that seems to be what quite a lot of the players are feeling, because they can't go out for dinner, or they can't go out, you know, to see some sights or to experience some culture. So they are getting weirdly more tired by not doing a huge amount. And secondly, what they don't have is they don't have hardly any distraction. You know, it's back in the hotel, you're at the cricket ground. And if you're at the hotel, there isn't really much to do. So you're thinking about the game. If you've had a bad day, you're thinking about having a bad day. And then you're back at the cricket ground. You can't get away from it, from the game. And it was even worse, I think, last summer for England's players, because they were staying in hotels at the grounds, right? So they were opening their curtains in the morning and looking at the cricket pitch, and the previous day, if they got a duck or whatever, or bowled poorly, they're looking at that. So I do think it has it is difficult, and that's a consistent message from most of the players. You'll hear that it is difficult, and it's difficult to say how much it's impacting their cricket, right? Because it's very difficult to quantify. But what I do think is that you see towards the end of series that teams and performances sort of drop off a little bit, and you know, we saw that to a certain extent with England. Towards the end of the India series, they just dropped off and sort of went into a downward spiral. So it is difficult. And hopefully this summer in England, there'll be a bit more of a relaxation in the rules, so that the players can do a little bit more and get out and about. Because I think, you know, that's from a sort of mental well-being perspective is really, really important that they have that time.
Coming back to some cricket now. So now that India won this series and they've qualified for the World Test Championship, so how do you think the India-New Zealand Test match is going to go for the championship at Southampton? So how do the two sides match up from your point of view, knowing English conditions?
Yeah, it's going to be a really interesting game. I'm really looking forward to it. Hopefully I'll be able to get there in person and report on it. I think it's going to be a fantastic game. I think they're quite evenly matched teams in the bowling department in English conditions. New Zealand's seam attack is obviously very, very good. India's seam attack is also very, very good. So I don't think there's a huge amount to choose from. The Southampton pitch can be low and slow, which could then bring in spin into the game a bit more. And if that is the case, and if we have some hot weather before, then I think India clearly will have an advantage there, because Ashwin will play, and New Zealand don't have a spinner in his class by any means. So I think it does depend on the pitch. And I think India's batting lineup actually is stronger and deeper than New Zealand's. Not saying New Zealand's batting lineup isn't very good, because it is, but I do think India have got the upper hand there. So, you know, I think I would have India as favourites actually for that game. I think India are the best Test team in the world across all conditions. And New Zealand, as fine a team as they are not quite as well-rounded as India. So I would have India as favourites. But given that it's in England, and if the ball does move and swing and seam around, then, you know, New Zealand have a great chance, because their attack is fantastic.
Yeah. When actually the actual World Test Championship final was scheduled to be in Lords, right? Then that got me thinking, and I was kind of giving New Zealand the edge. But now that it's in Southampton, I guess. I mean, you're talking about the spin factor that might come in over there. So that is when I guess India will start as favorites.
Yeah, and one of the things about New Zealand is that they do make the most of all of the sort of talent they've got available. So, and also they will have had obviously two games against England, two Test matches before that. Well, that final to prepare. So, yeah, I think it's going to be a great game, and hopefully it's the weather stays nice and dry, and we can just get a full game in, and it'd be fantastic to see.
Lovely, Rob. Before we wrap it up, I think I'd like to ask you a couple of questions that have been sent by our listeners. So, the first one's from Nagwash Reddy, who happens to be one of our dedicated listeners, a wonderful person. So, his question is: has the English team started doing anything differently in the last 10 to 15 years in terms of preparation for touring India? I mean, particularly practicing against spin.
Have in terms of as part of their development system and their pathway program, they have been sending more teams to India, to the UAE, to Sri Lanka. They've been sending players on spin camps to Mumbai. So last winter, Dom Bess, for example, was one of the players who went to a spin camp in Mumbai for 2 weeks. Rangana Herath joined them, and they worked on spin for a 2 week camp. So, and what they've also done is the ECB have sent, or used to, they don't anymore because of some budget cuts, but they used to send young spinners away for the winter and pay for them to go and play club cricket in Australia, New Zealand. Now, while that's not the subcontinent conditions, the aim of that is getting young spinners to get more overs under their belt and to try and develop their games. So, with a view to them being able to contribute in the subcontinent. So those are the types of things that England have done. They have just hired Jeetan Patel as a spin bowling coach, and a guy called Richard Dawson, who is going to lead up the England Lions and the England under-19s. The reason they've picked Dawson is because he is a former Test match spinner. He played actually some Test matches in India quite a few years ago, but they want Dawson's experience in that role to be able to again encourage and bring forward more spin bowlers so that they can compete in India. But so that's the types of things they're doing. In terms of the touring stuff, obviously very different this time in that they weren't able to have any warm-up games. When they won in 2012, you'll remember they had 3 warm-up games before that Test series against India. And it's something the calendar doesn't always allow. They haven't done that since that 2012 tour. Obviously, this time they couldn't. So they're trying to make strides, but as I said earlier, I think until the county game makes some changes to the schedule, the pitches, the ball, whatever, England are always going to struggle when they go to India, no matter what sort of preparation they have, because ultimately you need the raw materials in the team, right?
Yes, Rob. And the second one is coming from Harish, who asks, would love to understand how the multi-format players are managed and how the captains handle them. So we've got players like Ben Stokes, Jofra Archer, Joss Butler, Johnny Best, who are some of the, I think, one of the best in the business in white ball cricket. So we'd just like to know an insight of how these players are handled by the captains and the management.
Yeah, and so first thing to say is that Owen Morgan and Joe Root, who are obviously the 2 captains, work very closely together. A couple of years ago, they sat the whole squad down in Sri Lanka when there was a crossover between the Tests and the one-day squad, sat them all down and went through exactly, sort of an ethos that they wanted the England squad to live by and play by. So they work very closely together. So they lead the team and those multi-format players very much together. But I do think there's a difference in terms of the styles between Owen and Joe. Owen is a more experienced cricketer and leader than Joe Root is, although I think Root has improved quite a bit in his captaincy, particularly in the last year. But really, they're both very similar in how they treat players, and the multi-format players is they like the players to learn and experience things for themselves and work things out for themselves. So that's how both of them sort of operate. But the environments are different, the squads are different, and even though the likes of Josh Butler and Ben Stokes play every format, they do. The way England prepare and the way the England teams are set up, they do play differently. The Test side is a bit more attritional, so they are managed a little bit differently because it is a bit more conservative and looking to grind the opposition down. Whereas in white ball cricket, Owen Morgan just says to them, go out and try and hit every ball for six. I mean, I realise that's simplistic, but generally that's the stance. So there is some differences into how they're managed. But Owen and Joe work very closely. And the other thing is actually on rotation is that, the players are looked at to see when they need to play certain formats of cricket. So last summer, for example, Joe Root had a full strength test team. So Butler, Stokes, Archer, they all play test cricket. They missed some white ball cricket and Owen Morgan was fine with that. This year to start with, it's been the other way around. But again, that is they're joint decisions made by Owen, Joe, and the selection panel together. So hopefully that's answered the question. It's just a number of different facets to it.
That was quite lovely insight, Rob. And I think we're pretty much done with this. But before we let you go, we'd like to know, like, you've interviewed quite a few cricketers from all around the world, past and present. So if there's a couple of them, like, all the memories that you take from whatever learnings that you had gotten from those interviews, would you like to share them?
Yeah, good question. Actually, it was one of the more recent things I've done, but I spoke actually to Chris Wokes it's probably before Christmas now, actually. And I think it was something I was thinking about the other day when you look at cricket and you look at cricketers and how they're performing, and it's actually something that came to mind when I was scrolling through Twitter and looking at Johnny Bairstow had just got out and looking at all of the comments around him. And, I think it is very easy to forget these guys are actually human beings and that they have stresses and worries. And I spoke to Chris Wokes before Christmas and he was talking to me about his family and how, he just wants to make his family proud. And he spoke about his past, growing up as a kid and what he used to do with his dad and, how he wishes he could go back and do more of those things with his dad now, but obviously he doesn't have the time. And I think it is, you talk to these players and you understand actually there's a lot more, these are human beings and sometimes they don't play very well, but, that we should probably give them a bit more slack than we do occasionally. So I thought that was an interesting perspective from Chris, just talking about, stuff away from cricket. And the other thing is just on that point, Joe Root's 100th test. I spoke to quite a few players about Joe. I spoke to Owen Morgan, Josh Butler. I spoke to Andy Flower, previous coach of England. And again, they all mentioned the human side to these cricketers. And I think that is something that actually as journalists, we can do a bit of a better job of telling those human stories a bit more and the little things that sort of make the cricketers the people they are. And that's something that hopefully I'm going to do a bit more of that, because it's definitely something that we should all consider when we're looking at cricket. Yes, it's important, but these guys are humans as well, and they've all got their individual stories and worries and concerns to tell as well.
Wonderful, Rob. Wonderful. And would you like to say something about a podcast? I mean, if in case I'm sorry, I should have told you more about what exactly we do. But yeah, basically it's a very free-flowing Telugu conversation that happens. Telugu is something that's been, I think it's the third most spoken language in India, as I've already mentioned in the chart. And also we have a good, decent amount of listeners in the US as well. So we've recently completed 50 episodes and we've interviewed few domestic cricketers and a few coaches who had worked with the India A team and all that. So we hope to do much more. But I think this interview has been really special because this is the first time we recorded a full-length English episode. We have done an English episode, but it wasn't full-length in English. It was with Kritika, where she had shared some of the Australian memories. It was before the Australian series, I guess. So this, I think, our listeners will find very enlightening and very much insightful because of the kind of information and the stories that you have told throughout the episode. So I think it's really wonderful.
Yeah, no, thank you, and thank you guys for having me. I've really enjoyed it, and some interesting questions and stuff, and I like the interaction with the questions from the listeners. I think that's really good. So look, thank you for having me. I really am grateful for you asking, and hopefully it was good.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. I mean, it was pleasure knowing you, pleasure having you on the show. I mean, we hope to have you again later. I mean, whenever England does something out of the ordinary, whether it is something like the text gate during KP era, or I mean, whether if they win the World T20 later this year, you pretty sure we'll have you again on the show.
Yeah, that would be good. Any time, just give me a shout. I'm very happy to join. It was really fun.
సో అదండి ఈరోజు రాబ్ జాన్స్టన్తో మా ప్రత్యేక ఎపిసోడ్. అది కంప్లీట్గా అంటే ఇంగ్లీష్లో చేయడానికి గల కారణం ఏమిటంటే మా లిసనర్స్ కొంతమంది ఎప్పటి నుంచో రిక్వెస్ట్ చేస్తున్నారు. అంటే వేరే ఇప్పుడు మన తెలుగు వాళ్ళే కాకుండా వేరే వాళ్ళు కూడా చాలామంది చాలాసార్లు వినడానికి ప్రయత్నం చేసి కొంచెం వాళ్ళకి మన భాష అర్థం కాక కొంతమంది రిక్వెస్ట్ చేశారు, మీకు అవకాశం ఉన్నప్పుడు ఇంగ్లీష్ ఎపిసోడ్లు చేయమని అడిగారు. అండ్ అదే కాకుండా మన క్రికెట్ నగరం ఫ్యామిలీలో మన లిసనర్స్ కూడా చాలామంది ఇంగ్లాండ్ పర్స్పెక్టివ్ని ఇంకా బెటర్గా అండర్స్టాండ్ చేసుకోవడానికి కొన్ని రిక్వెస్ట్ చేశారు. సో దానివలన మేము రాబ్ జాన్స్టన్ తను క్రికెట్ ఇంగ్లాండ్లో చాలా కాలం నుంచి కవర్ చేస్తున్నాడు అండ్ చాలా ప్లేయర్స్ని మీరు తన మాటలోనే విన్నారు తన వర్క్ ఏంటి ఎలా ఉంటుంది అనేది. సో హోప్ఫుల్లీ ఈ ఇంటర్వ్యూ మీ అందరికీ నచ్చిందని కోరుకుంటున్నాం. అండ్ ఇంకా ఈ వెరైటీ ఆఫ్ ఎపిసోడ్స్ చేసే ప్రయత్నంలో మీకేమైనా సజెషన్స్ ఉంటే నాకు రాహుల్కి ఫార్వర్డ్ చేయండి, ఆర్ యూ కెన్ పింగ్ అస్ ఇన్ క్రికెట్ నగరం ఓన్లీ. బట్ ఇంకొక ముఖ్యమైన విషయం ఏంటంటే మా పాడ్కాస్ట్ని మీరు సపోర్ట్ చేయదలుచుకుంటే కనుక మేము ఈ ఎపిసోడ్ కింద ఒక లింక్ అనేది ప్రొవైడ్ చేశాము. సో మీరు ఆ లింక్ని క్లిక్ చేస్తే మా క్రికెట్ నగరం పాడ్కాస్ట్ గురించి అండ్ అలాగే మేము ఎటువంటి వర్క్ చేస్తాము, మా ఫ్యూచర్ ప్లాన్స్ ఏంటి అనేది కూడా మీకు అర్థమవుతుంది దాంట్లో. సో ఫ్రెండ్స్తో షేర్ చేయండి అండ్ అలాగే మీకు తగినంత సహాయం కూడా చేయండి. సో అది ఈ వారం మరి స్పెషల్ ఎపిసోడ్. మళ్ళీ ఈ వారం కలుసుకునేంత వరకు నా తరపు నుంచి అండ్ రాహుల్ తరపు నుంచి అండ్ అలాగే మా అతిథులైన రాబ్ జాన్స్టన్ గారి దగ్గర నుంచి కూడా సెలవు.